you spent months digging into IDEs and coding assistants and came out of the other side of this with like 30 plus vulnerabilities, 24 CVEs.
And I wanted to make a real impact. For the first like 3 or so vulnerabilities, I didn't even know that it's an entirely new vulnerability class.
You kind of redefined the threat model by bringing the base IDE layer into scope.
This is exactly like the turn point affecting all the IDEs. Because everyone wanted it so quick, they build it on top of existing products.
Are we talking like nation state APTs?
Do I look like a nation state level? I was doing this research mostly by myself. I would definitely say it's not nation level.
People are just kind of doing YOLO mode.
I wouldn't give full autonomous AI agent access to my corporate environment. Like, no way.
Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Ari Marzouk. Ari, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I've been excited to chat with you since I came across your research. I've been, obviously writing and reading a lot about AI security, including AI coding agents, things of that nature. But for folks that don't know you, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ari. I've been doing offensive security for the past 10 years or so. Mostly AI in the past 2-3 years because it's so interesting. I find it interesting, and it's also it's so new. There's so much attack surface, so I find it interesting. I'm currently working for Microsoft. Previously, I've been working for Salesforce, NSO Group, and the Israeli military intelligence. And actually, let me start with a quick disclaimer so I don't piss off someone at legal. So the information that I share today represent my own personal views. I'm speaking for myself and not on behalf of my employer, Microsoft Corporation. There we go. We can begin.
Yeah, you got to do that when you work for a big, global corporation such as Microsoft. So I totally understand. For folks that aren't familiar with you and your research, though, you did this research, I think it was the end of 2025, roughly, called IDEs. And I'm curious, you spent months digging into AI IDEs and coding assistants and came out of the other side of this with like 30 plus vulnerabilities, 24 CVEs. What pulled you into this research originally? And what point did you realize you weren't just finding one-off bugs, but as you put it, kind of an entirely new vulnerability class that impacted all these coding assistants?
So the reason I was starting to look at this is because I wanted to make some public work to showcase my skills, because I felt like most of what I've done up to that point was internal, so no one knew about it. And I had some experience with being in the frame. I had my YouTube channel. You can see the setup right here. So I kind of wanted to do that, and I picked the first thing that I decided to pick on was Cursor, because it was extremely popular back then, and I also wanted to make a real impact, and as well as I was using it myself. So there's nothing better than playing with what you already have. So that's how I started, and then I think that for the first 3 or so vulnerabilities, I didn't even know that it's an entirely new vulnerability class. So it's just I was playing with it, and I just didn't have enough depth to understand it at this point. But after 3 vulnerabilities, when I started to see the rhythm and I started to better understand why these work, and not just, okay, it works, but why it works, then I figure out it was because of features inside the IDE. So I was like, wait, we got more contenders here. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, you kind of talked about this, what makes it fundamentally different? Before this, attacks or vulnerabilities of AI coding tools, it would target individual components or a vulnerable tool or configuration, writable MCP config, an agent setting, things like that. You kind of redefined the threat model by bringing the base IDE layer into scope. Why does that distinction matter? And why does it impact, nearly all the AI IDEs that you tested? You found almost all of them, I think, if not all of them, were vulnerable.
So I think that the reason that it matters is because this is exactly what changes this from being a single bug to being a universal one affecting all the IDEs. So this is exactly the turn point where it turns into a vulnerability class rather than being a few bugs that affect multiple vendors. So why all of them were affected. I think it's pretty obvious that when you target like a layer that's shared across a few products, then once you find something there, it typically affects all of them. And I think another reason is because with like AI IDEs and AI agents and AI assisted development, it took off so quickly. Like and vendors tried to catch up and have their own version of what already worked. And because everyone wanted it so quick, so they like build it on top of like existing products such as like Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ, because it's easier to just like add an extension or fork and add your own stuff instead of like building it from scratch, which again makes it a lot easier for me if I find something in that base layer to have a bigger effect.
Yeah, and you kind of led to my next question here. You in this piece you talked about this phrase "secure for AI," right? You argued that the base IDEs were never really built for autonomous AI agents in mind. Like, how should we be thinking about this beyond just the IDEs? It seems like the same problem likely exists, like across many different forms of legacy software infrastructure, thinking like CI/CD pipelines, collaboration tools, cloud environments. Everyone, as is kind of racing to bolt on or build in AI capabilities, whether it's, trying to stay relevant in the market or, keep up with competitors and peers. AI is kind of infiltrating everything. It's kind of becoming pervasive. So like, do you think that this is going to be a situation where not just the IDEs, but many other forms of software and infrastructure likely may face something similar?
I don't think, I'm sure. Like, you're actually on point here. Like, the problem definitely exists outside of IDEs. Like, IDEs were just my specific example, but that's like the exact reason that I felt the need for this new principle to have a broader like impact, to be able to properly show people how this like research might affect their own like field of work. So I definitely think that this is something that has to be considered like from now on. So when you build something new, definitely take the secure for AI principle in mind, so you're not the next one.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, like, given it impacted so many big name vendors, right? Like big name products that have millions of users, worldwide adoption. What was the response? You don't have to name names, but the response from, these vendors, these organizations, as you started disclosing this, was there, quick response to try to remediate it? Is it even something that can necessarily be quote unquote patched, given it's kind of inherently built into the underlying base layer IDE as you talked about, or what did that look like?
So right here, it kind of depends on where, right? So for some, it was quicker. For others, it wasn't as quick. I guess I would say it's definitely patchable. Like, so when you diff fix it, right, you don't necessarily fix the entire vulnerability class, but you still make it harder or fix a single instance, which is definitely better because we talk about like defense in depth and like layers of defense here. So even if it doesn't prevent the entire thing, I would still encourage to like add it as an additional layer of security here. I guess that's it.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I'm curious, like from the, we talked about like the vendors and the defenders and things to consider as we build these products and, kind of build these agentic capabilities. And from the attacker's perspective, like you walk through, potential data exfiltration, and you use simple examples like just writing a JSON file to a remote schema and things like that. How much sophistication does it take to actually kind of exploit these things? Are we talking like nation state APTs or kind of, what do you think the level of sophistication needed to exploit these kind of foundings are?
Do I look like a nation state level? Well, so I was doing this research mostly by myself. So if I was able to get this, I would definitely say it's not nation level, like state level attacks. It's like, it's been shown before, like we've got Johan from Embrace the Red that showed like ASCII smuggling inside a README file. That could be like a very simple yet effective approach. I would say there are like tons of other prompt engineering vectors. And to be fair, like my research didn't really focus on the like prompt injection vectors because I felt like it's always going to be possible. There is no way to prevent that entirely. So what we want to do is, again, defense in depth. We want to see what the impact is and minimize the impact. So README is one thing, but again, like connecting to an MCP server, right? That might even be legitimate, but then the next week it's no longer. Either because someone decided to make it malicious or because someone just hacked it and made it malicious, right? So you also gotta monitor the things. Like you gotta understand what you're doing, which is something that's especially hard with AI because it's so fun that you don't have to understand and it does the work for you.
Yeah, that was actually going to be part of my next question to you is you talked about MCP there. We see all explosive adoption, right, in 2025 of MCP, calling external tools, data sources, things like that. I think there was a lot of interesting rug pulls, tool poisoning attacks, all kinds of different things that we saw unfold. And you talked about the emphasis around monitoring, like, from the defender's perspective and not naming any vendors per se, but like how are organizations or how should they be monitoring what coding agents they have running on their endpoints, what they have access to, what data they're accessing, what tools they may be using, like these kind of things. How do you think about it from the defender's perspective?
So honestly, I'm going to break this answer to two. So the first thing that I want to say is that, as I already said, I don't see prompt injection. Like I don't see this disappearing. So I definitely see this evolving. And I think that the best way to prevent this, or it's not exactly preventing, but it's to minimize the impact, right? So this can happen on a lot of different layers. That could be isolation of the agents, limiting what data it has access to, giving it just access to what it needs, just-in-time access. And then for the second part, right? That's right that like vendors like adopt MCP now and they're adding AI agents everywhere. So how are we going to do it? It's a difficult question, right? Like I don't have a perfect answer to how we can prevent it entirely, but I guess that's like part of my job. That's what part of why I made this research. So people are aware that it's there and they have to think and come up with like solutions.
Yeah,
Right?
so I was going to ask you that. You use like, just giving it limited levels of access or just what it needs access to and so on. We've had this concept of least privilege access control literally for decades, right? Like probably 50 years. It's kind of been part of the lexicon of cybersecurity. But year after year, you see credential compromise, excessive permissions, especially in cloud environments. The last several years. Do you have a lot of hope? I personally don't have a lot of hope when I think about this because we struggle to do it with human users and scale and access. Now we're talking, agents, NHIs, et cetera, like a scale that's far exceeding human users. Like, and then also I feel like the concept is evolving, from least permissive access control to maybe like least permissive autonomy or agency, in the agent context. Like, what do you think about that?
So I'm definitely happy I have a job because of that. But I definitely think that it is going to be a problem. It is already a problem. I feel like that's part of what the research already shows. But again, what I would personally do is, again, try to it's not that these things didn't exist before, just like you said. Like these issues existed even with humans. So I kind of feel like it's a trade-off right here. And again, in either cases, you have to work on your defense layers. You have to add monitoring. You have to isolate things as much as you can to minimize the impact as much as you can. And again, try to find these things as much, like prevent prompt injection, use newer models because they have lower likelihood of being prompt injected, right? And then again, I'm circling back to understanding what you're doing because I feel like that's the biggest issue right now. Because with humans, like as you said, it did happen. Like it's not that's like we've had it for 50 years. It happened before. People misconfigure stuff, and it's still going to happen. But it's a lot easier for that to happen when you don't understand what you're doing. Now, if you don't understand what you're doing as a human, sometimes things just don't work. And if they don't work, it's sometimes better because to fix them, you actually have to understand what you're doing. But then with AI, sometimes things work without even like having to understand what they are. So my biggest tip in terms of defense is going to be you have to properly understand what it did, how it did, why it did. Like, I want you to feel comfortable with what with the changes, like, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. And this actually, I was going to ask you about this because we've seen like human in the loop be kind of a control or a mechanism that's been advocated for like critical activities or sensitive data operations, et cetera. And I think you touched on this a bit with like you said like even with diff preview enabled, which was supposed to be kind of a human in the loop control, your remote JSON schema exfiltration still triggered. I think it said in your write up. And you also noted that developers are, experiencing approval fatigue, right? As agents generate hundreds of actions, is human in the loop even a viable kind of strategy here? Like we're kind of deluding ourselves to say, yeah, just put a human in the loop. But then you have X number of agents and X number of activities, and people are just kind of doing YOLO mode. And it kind of touches on your point of like understanding what's happening and why and how it works and so on. But if we just kind of blindly trust it because we don't want to approve everything and have to understand the nuances and details, it seems like we're on a path to not understanding very well what happened or why it happened.
Honestly, I agree. Like, I feel like a lot of the human in the loop actions are there just like to take responsibility, like to move the responsibility to the user, But again, some of the responsibility is the user's. Like before the user misconfigured it, like if the AI agent misconfigures it for the user now, it is still their responsibility to go over it. So I kind of agree with both sides, yet I would say that like I'm guilty. I've had times where I was like I've had that approval fatigue and I was like, okay, YOLO mode. But even when I do that, like I try to minimize what the agent has access to, either like running it in a container or in a virtual machine where it doesn't have access to other things, or limit especially the things that I know are going to be critical. So let's say maybe like if I'm concerned about like web requests, maybe I'll just put the approval, like the human in the loop for that part, because I don't mind it reading or writing files on the VM. I know there's nothing there, right? So I'm going to put extra effort on that exfiltrate, like that potential data exfiltration vector, and that I guess that could help with the approval fatigue because you have less things to approve. But again, I still see more and more people trying to maximize productivity, running multiple agents, and then you can't really approve everything and see everything at the same time as well because you want it to go fast, and it goes faster than you. But I kind of think of it like remember that you're kind of giving like an hyper fast junior developer, like researcher, whatever, working for you. So while it does work very fast, you still gotta have to go over what it does. Like at least now, I don't know how models are going to improve in the future, which is another interesting topic.
Yeah, you touched on a few things that are worth highlighting. Is like, I think you talked about the parallelization of it. Like we've seen efforts like Gastown or the Ralph Wiggum loop, I think it's called, where people are like, using massive amounts of agents in parallel fashion and not even necessarily constraining them. And then you talked about sandboxing or isolation, or constraining your human in the loop approvals to just whether it's certain activities that you're particularly concerned about with web access and so on. And I feel like the sandboxing topic has been hot this last several weeks with the rise of OpenClaw, right? And I think you hinted at this. You didn't really necessarily call it out by name, but I feel like we're watching the security capability trade-off is something I think I read in OpenClaw, or one of the blogs on the topic, where it's very utility because it can access files, it can run scripts, it can run commands, it can access the web, makes it so valuable, and that's also what makes it so vulnerable. So it feels like we're trying to wrestle with like the capability versus volatility or vulnerability trade-off, and history has shown that we almost always optimize for utility and efficiency, et cetera, over security. So I feel like we may see some of that play out again.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree, and that's again why I have my job, I guess. And then, like as I said earlier, I'm guilty as well. Like I wanted to play with it, and I wanted it to be able to actually do things. Now, for it to actually be able to do things, you gotta give it the power. Like if you don't give it the power, then it's not going to do anything. But then at the same time, I'm trying to minimize it. So let's say if I run OpenClaw, right, and I give it like credentials to something, then for the for testing purposes, I'm just going to give it a new vault with just a single secret for something that I know it has access to, and then I'm going to change password later, you know? So you gotta be careful, but it still makes it possible to use, a little less efficient, I know, but I think especially now when it's very new, it's a good time to try to balance the things and not just focus on utilizing, but also on security, because that's a point most people miss, you know?
Yeah, I agree there. I think I'll be curious to see that, of course, you're very security conscious, where most, the broader user base is not necessarily going to be thinking about it from that perspective. So I am curious to see like what guardrails and controls and protections get put in from, large providers, security players, of course. And then to your point, the models themselves may improve to the extent where maybe the need to constrain isn't so critical if they become more secure in their nature, how they operate, and so on. So we've went through a lot of topics of sandboxing, exploitation, vulnerabilities, and IDEs, all the things. And not to leave us on a doom and gloom note, a lot of teams, developers, organizations, enterprises are using these tools, Cursor, Copilot, Cloud Code, et cetera. Like if, they can't stop using these tools tomorrow, we know that we're not going to stop that. What are 2, 3, high impact things you think that organizations and security leaders can leave thinking about and maybe prioritize?
So I would definitely think the single most important thing is isolation, right? So that could be either a container, a virtual machine, whatever, that significantly minimizes the impact. And the second thing is perhaps thinking of better security defaults, and perhaps even like setting some settings so they can't be changed. So, it's like, even if the defaults are secure, it's very easy for someone to just go and set up YOLO mode because they want it to go quicker. Then while this person typically thinks about their productivity and not really about security, when they have those limitations, it kind of balances it out and says, wait, you gotta think about this. Because, we already see these things with other, in other spaces. Typically, especially with big corporations, there are limitations. You can't just do whatever you want. You have specific approved software, you have specific firewall rules, whatever, right? You have monitoring. So I think all of that has to apply to AI agents as well. And it is definitely going to take time, as it is still new. But I definitely think that it is the right place. Like, I wouldn't give a full AI agent, like autonomous AI agent, access to like my corporate environment. Like, no way.
Yeah, I agree there. Although I will say I've seen multiple security vendors report 20 to 40+% of, kind of samples they've done of enterprise customers have instances of OpenClaw, for example, running in enterprise environments. So doesn't seem like people may listen to that. We'll see how that plays out.
That's exactly why I said that. I think some of these again, the monitoring and blocking has to come from the organization level as well. So even if people don't listen to that, because I'm sure people are always not going to listen, because again, they prioritize productivity over security, then it kind of blocks them, and no, you can't do that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's going to be the age-old, kind of enterprise-wide governance security mechanisms that are gonna mitigate the risk. So again, we've run the gamut of sandboxing, exploitation of IDEs, autonomous agents, all the things. I know you have a blog, if I'm not mistaken. Anything you want to throw out there before we wrap up here, where people can find you? Also, maybe where you're turning attention to. You focus on AI coding assistants. Anything else you're maybe focusing on full time at the moment that you're looking to show some interesting findings on?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, whatever, X, on my blog, right, macarita.com. I'm definitely up for some interesting things. I'm trying to focus on what's interesting now, like the newest things that came out. I'm not going to throw names yet because I don't want to like spoil or anything, and things might also change as I go. But definitely look out, follow, and it's going to be interesting. That I promise.
Well, I'll be following along, and I'll drop your blog to the show notes as well. So, Ari, thanks so much for jumping on, man, and breaking down your findings on IDE disaster, as well as like the broader, kind of risks and landscapes around AI, coding tools, assistance, MCP, everything we kind of covered. I appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for having me. It was great.
Absolutely. Take care.
Great to meet you. Bye bye.